Hey guys, and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. Me and Rob are so excited. We're going to get into it. It is finally time to do our fantasy quarterback rankings. That's right. We're talking about the top 32 fantasy quarterback options, not just where these guys are ranked, but why they're ranked. They're all the information that you're going to need to dominate in your fantasy league this year. As you can tell from the title of this video, it is a tiered system. Rob is going to talk about that more in a minute and what that means for our philosophy and everything like that. But first, we've got some news to get through with real quick, and that is you guys absolutely have to make sure that you are subscribed, that you're following us on Instagram or on Facebook. All three of those would be great, but we've got some huge things coming out. We're going to be updating our website and offering tons of stuff on there, a live Instagram feed on there. Our rankings are going to be on there. They're not quite yet because we're having some issues with that, but in a few days that'll be out, and that's why you should be following us, because that's going to be posted on our channel, on our Facebook, and on our Instagram. It's going to be plastered everywhere. So if you are following us or subscribed, you're going to see it and you're going to be able to find the link, click it, and boom, you're going to be able to check out everything else. And that's the other thing that I wanted to mention to you. We are also going to be offering something new, which is a premium stats page with all sorts of statistics that we're talking about, that we're doing and that we're using to help kind of evaluate guys and talking about some of our research for this videos, but it'll be available to you. I believe it'll be $5 a month. We're going to talk about that more. There'll be a link in our Patreon. It's not set up, however. That's why you should be following us, because it's going to take just a few days for us to finalize some things on there. But that's just something we're really excited about. That's something that's really going to help you guys. That's really going to help us. And I think it's going to be huge, helping the FFP move forward in this 2019 fantasy season. But I have nothing more to say on that news, guys. Drop a comment down below if you have any questions on that specifically. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get to really the core of this video, the quarterback ranking.
So understanding how to develop or use tiers is so important. It's not just about getting your rankings right. Tier will help you determine in the draft what you need to do when the inevitable quarterback run happens. It'll happen. You don't need to grab the next guy just because he's the next quarterback on your rankings. What you need to determine at this point is who's out there, what's available in the different positions, and in that particular tier. For example, let's say there's a run on quarterbacks. Tier 1 quarterbacks are taken, and there's a last Tier 1 ranking is out there. You may want to grab that guy. But let's say that's already gone. It's bumped into what we would call our Tier 2 quarterbacks. There's 6 guys available. Most likely one of those guys is going to come back around, because a lot of those guys are in that same level of talent. They're going to produce for you, get the same value for them. Therefore, you can wait on a quarterback and grab another position, maybe build up your running backs. Once again, it's not just about getting your rankings right. You need to tier these guys and ebb and flow and kind of show you what direction to go during the draft. That's so important. Looks like you have something to say there.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds sometimes more complicated than it needs to be, but a tier of quarterbacks or a tier of players is really just guys who have similar value. Different value. One guy has more value than the next and the other guy and whatever, but similar value. And that's what we're looking for here, and that's why it's important. So that as we're having fun in this video squabbling over details, you understand that in the end, maybe we're just picking hairs or whatever, and it's not that big of a deal. But I'll let you continue talking, Rob.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say for you guys, it's hard to win a fantasy championship if you are deficient in any one area. It's hard to win a championship if, Blake Bortles was your quarterback last year. You probably didn't win a championship. Let's just be honest there. With that said, one of our philosophies here, we believe at FFP, it's fundamentally important, is that we never take a quarterback early. It's not because we don't think quarterbacks are valuable and they're not important, but because there's so many guys that are producing now. I'm not going to get into it, but the last couple of years we put out some good videos, some good matrix that kind of showed that there's just a lot more productivity in quarterbacks. Therefore, you can get your quarterback maybe 5th, 6th, or 7th round. Don't rush. Don't grab a quarterback in the 1st or 2nd rounds. Vitally important. Once again, wait, get that value. You'll still, you can still win a championship with a quarterback around the 8 to 15 rankings easily. So.
Well, exactly. We were just talking about before we started filming this video. I mean, where was Pat Mahomes' ADP, or where was Andrew Luck? These were guys who were not considered starters, who weren't even being drafted in a lot of leagues, and there were some major concerns. Sure enough, they ended up being the number 1 and the number 3, or on some leagues the number 2 fantasy quarterbacks, and so they were really great options, and they worked out great. We fully believe that you can wait on a quarterback and still get a valuable guy, but that's all I think we have to do to explain this. This is our Tier 1 we're about to get into.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, a good point there is Pat Mahomes last year. His average draft position was 9th round, which meant that it's not that he had a huge year for you, which he obviously did if you owned him, but that meant you didn't have to get until the 9th round, which allowed you to build your team in so many other areas. That's not going to be the case this year, and many leagues, owners will take him in the 1st round. So,
all right.
Are you ready?
Yeah, let's get into it. This is our first tier with the top 7 quarterbacks. All right, so here we are, number 1, guys. We got to put Pat Mahomes here. He had this awesome last year. He was phenomenal. He was insane, over 5,000 passing yards and 50 touchdowns passing. Plus, he had 2 rushing, so he had 52 total touchdowns. But really, the question for you guys isn't how amazing was he last year. The question you're probably asking yourselves is, how do I know he'll be number 1 again? So here's some statistics that I found. I went and did some research and found the number 2 through 12 quarterbacks with the most touchdowns collectively averaged 32 touchdowns last year. That's 18 less than Pat Mahomes. Even if he has a slight regression, he'll still have easily more than the average starting fantasy quarterback. That is a total of 108 fantasy points and touchdowns alone. The number 2 guy, the guy who's supposed to be right behind him, Andrew Luck, he only finished with 39. That's 11 less touchdowns. So even if he makes a slight regression and only throws 45, he still leads the NFL for touchdowns again. So I think that's really impressive. Not only that, but some quarterbacks really tend to lead the NFL because they have an insane amount of attempts. For whatever that might be, there's flukes where just the defense is bad and he has to throw more. That was not fully the case, or not necessarily the case with Pat Mahomes. He actually finished 6th in dropbacks and 7th in attempts last season, and both were actually 100 less dropbacks and 100 less attempts than Ben Roethlisberger, who finished number 1 in that category. And so it's not at all a stretch. In fact, it's very realistic and very likely to assume Pat Mahomes is going to get the same amount of volume as he did last year. He's going to get the same amount of passes and the same amount of dropbacks, and I think that we can really safely say that. And one thing that I like is, again, he didn't have this unbelievably insane elite receiving core. I think he's got some very good options. I love Travis Kelce and I love Tyreek Hill, but he did have some weaknesses. He actually had to deal with 32 dropped passes last year. That was 2nd most in the NFL, and I fully expect that number to pick up. Why was that, and why do I expect that number to pick up? Well, because Sammy Watkins missed 6 games, and that right there, your number 2 wide receiver missing 6 games, makes a big difference. His backup came in, Chris Conley. He had the 6th most dropped passes. 13.5% of his targets or his passes were dropped. So I think that's absolutely huge that Watkins is going to be healthy for a full year. He's going to have that extra 6 games with him. I think that's really going to help shore up that wide receiving core into being one of the best in the NFL. And then finally, I think people are really nervous about this Tyreek Hill situation, but really everything's looking better for him. All these reports all these things are coming out, but nothing bad has come out, and the NFL hasn't said anything. And to be quite honest, there's a very good chance he plays the entire 2019 season suspension-free. I haven't heard anything negative come out for him. Of course, they also went out and drafted Mecole Hardman. That's another wide receiver 3 option to come in and help shore up that bench and replace Chris Conley. But really, everything's to like with Pat Mahomes. I don't think there's really anything I got against this guy. Strongest arm in the NFL, one of the most athletic guys. He's smart, he's young. It's really a perfect situation.
Yeah, I think he's going to regress a little bit this year, but still end up with around 40 touchdown passes. One of the things, just to add to your point there, is that later in the season, he had Damian Williams take over as running back. He wasn't there for the majority of the season, but he actually led all running backs in catch percentage. Now he's going to be there. Looks like he's going to be the starting running back there. So there's just one more weapon he has that's going to have good hands all year long. So even with regression, I love this guy. How can you not have Pat Mahomes number 1? So
absolutely. Let's get to our number 2 guy, Rob.
So Andrew Luck. So in football terms, when you hit age 30, you're getting old. But for a quarterback, not so much. So he's at that age. He's kind of hitting around 30 there, but he's still got 7 or 8 really good years. In the last 4 seasons, when he's been on the field and played, he's averaged 2.31 touchdown passes per game. Over 16 games, that turns out to be 37 touchdown passes per season. That's better than Aaron Rodgers, who's number 2 at 2.11 touchdown passes per game. Once again, he is the number 1 quarterback during that same stretch as far as touchdown passes per game, minus, of course, Pat Mahomes. I didn't include him in that list because it's only been 1 season. But other than Pat Mahomes, like I said, nobody the last 4 years when he's been on the field has more touchdown passes per game there. Love this guy. Last season, he had a career best quarterback rate and a career best completion percentage. Now, early in his career, he had some higher interceptions. His quarterback rating wasn't that high. He had some struggles, but a lot of that was due to bad O-line play. Indianapolis has improved greatly in that area. Their O-line's better. You got tight ends. You got Ebron and Doyle, very good pass-catching tight ends there. You look at Mack and Hines. They're above-average pass-catching backs. Hilton is a very good and I think a very underrated wide receiver. In fact, a lot of people forget that in 2016, Hilton led the NFL in receiving yards. Now this year they added Devin Funchess, which I think is going to be a moderate help. I'm not a big Devin Funchess fan. I don't know where you lie with that guy, what your thoughts are on him, but
I don't think it matters. There's a lot of other options there. I think he's a fair wide receiver. He's far from a wide receiver 1, but he really comes into play as a wide receiver 2, a wide receiver 3, being really effective and just shore up that roster all around.
Yeah, I can see him as a wide receiver 3. The one guy they did add, though, in the offseason that I like is they drafted Paris Campbell. I think he's going to be a nice fit for that offense there. When you consider that Favre and Manning had their best record-setting seasons at ages 40 and 37, sky's the limit for Andrew Luck there. The only concern I have for him, really, honestly, is that defense. The defense is very talented and very young and getting better, which means he may not need to throw the ball as much as maybe he has typically in the past. But I love Andrew Luck. To me, he's our number 2 guy out there, averaging 2.31 touchdown passes per game. Any thoughts, anything you want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. A guy goes out there and has this phenomenal season, surprises everyone, shows us how healthy he can be, I mean, for one, and how effective he can be. And then all of a sudden, the Colts are like, oh yeah, and now we're going to go get our weapons. Because going into last season, no one was arguing the Colts had good weapons. No one was arguing that they had the best receiving core and tight end group and running back side of the backfield. No one was arguing that. And so what he was able to do with that, and then boom, come in and add some young pieces. I love Paris Campbell. And of course, now we have a lot more confidence in Ebron. I think this is a much better situation. We can feel a lot more confident this year. And I completely agree. Got a bit of a man crush on the guy. Andrew Luck has got to go number 2. I really think so.
Yeah. You know what? Eric Ebron was a huge addition for him, and Beasley kind of dismissed that as a fluke. But people forget that Eric Ebron was a first-round pick, in fact, an early first-round pick, top 10. So maybe he just finally came into his own.
Absolutely.
Let's get to our number 3 guy. We disagree a little bit on where he should be at. I think we'll both agree on the fact he's very good, though. Let's get to our number 3 guy.
All right, so here we are at number 3. We have Aaron Rodgers. As Rob just mentioned, we disagree on this a little bit. We both agree that Aaron Rodgers is a tier 1 quarterback. However, here's what we would say. He puts him at number 3. I would actually probably drop Aaron Rodgers down to 4 to 5, maybe to 6 in that sort of range. But again, still tier 1, right? There's a subtle difference in what we believe, but it's still tier 1. I still think we are on the same page. There's a guy who is best all time in passer rating with 103, better than any other quarterback. He's got a great system around him. I really think that he does. We'll talk about this more in a second, but let's start with the offensive line. Last year, the Packers ranked first with their offensive line pass blocking rating of 88.5. And Rodgers had the second most time in the pocket among qualifying quarterbacks with 2.75 seconds per drop back. That is very high compared to most. That's a very solid number. And as you know, guys, right, I think we always get enamored with these younger quarterbacks and these younger guys and what they can do. But he's been consistent over the last 6 full seasons that he has played. Now, the last few years, he's been banged up. He's been injured. He's had some issues in the last couple of years. But over the last 6 full seasons that he has played, he has averaged 40 touchdowns a year. I mean, that's one of those really insane, that's really high numbers you absolutely love to see. I absolutely love that he's been able to do that and that consistency. I really do feel safe with him. The question is really what was up with last year, and I think what was up with last year was poor coaching staff. I absolutely love that they really just finally got rid of Mike McCarthy and brought in a new guy who really started to find his own. Rodgers is going to benefit from having a new coach for a full year. He went from having a bad coach to having a better coach who is inexperienced and hasn't had time to put his offensive schemes into place. And so this really is going to be the first time in a couple of years that he has played and has had the coaching staff that he has needed. He's a guy who has one of the best deep accuracy percentage in the NFL. 41.8% of his deep passes are completed. This guy's got some great weapons. Of course, we know about Davante Adams, who is averaging 12.3 touchdowns a season and generating a quarterback rating of 117 over the last 3 years. He's a great number 1. He's, in fact, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He fits this role awesome. The question really is, does Green Bay have the wide receiver too? Right? I mean, that's the question, because you can put a guy, you can shade over top, you can do double coverage, you can do a lot of things to slow down Davante Adams if you don't have a number 2 wide receiver. And I think that the Packers do this year, and I think this is one of the biggest things that keeps him in here as a tier 1 wide receiver, and that is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, one of the biggest breakout performer, or what I'm expecting to be one of the biggest breakout performers and one of my sleepers heading into this season. Not only last year did he finish with a solid 581 yards and 2 touchdowns on 38 catches, but his metrics were great. Right, his volume wasn't amazing because some offensive struggles and some playing time struggles, but the metrics were great. He generated a pass rating of 95.4. He averaged 5.7 extra yards after the catch. and he finished third best in the NFL with a separation rate of 70%. That is his distance away from the cornerback. 70% of the time, he is more than a yard away from a cornerback. That is just enough space to make the catch and make the play that he needs to make, and I absolutely love that. That right there talks about route running, his ability to get open, the scheme of the offense, and what he's going to be able to do. But don't take my word for it. I'm just a fantasy football prophet, a guy who plays too much fantasy and is obsessed. Let's talk about the teammates around him. Adam said, I think this offense is really catered for a guy like him. And even said that he saw the way he's been hitting the offense and hitting this offseason, and he likes what he's been doing. He's taking the football very seriously. Aaron Rodgers came out and said, there's nothing wrong with having a go-to guy who's dynamic like Davante Adams, but he also said we need a guy, a complementary piece, and he said, I think that Marquez is that guy, and he's had a fantastic spring, has really stepped up to be the guy who can be an every down player. And that's what I absolutely like. This, for me, when I was doing my research, was the one question mark that I had for Aaron Rodgers being a tier 1 was, does he have the wide receiver 2? And in my mind, he definitely does in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but not everyone's going to agree with that. Rob, what do you got to say?
Yeah, I like Aaron Rodgers. I think he bounces back this year. I feel stupid even saying bounce back. We all talked about what a down year he had, and yet I don't have his stats in front of me. You might have his, but I think he finished with like 25 touchdown passes to only 2 interceptions in a bad year. That's insane. This guy's been phenomenal. And you're right about the wide receivers. Going into last year, Aaron Rodgers was very critical of a lot of those young wide receivers, but now a year later, been in the system, maybe being in the NFL, understanding the work it's going to take, the dedication, his attitude towards the wide receivers is a lot better. So I think they're good. Another one I like that's going to be a major boost for him is the return of Aaron Jones. When he was in there, he really took over as the number 1 guy, run the ball, and he was effective. I think having him back this year, assuming he's healthy and recovered, we'll have to wait and see how that goes, of course. But I love him. I love Aaron Rodgers. So.
Now, boom, you got the best offensive line in the NFL. You get your running back, you get a wide receiver developing, you keep your number 1 wideout, one of the best in the NFL, and you get an improved coaching staff situation. I mean, things are really set in place for him to be a solid tier 1 quarterback. I have no concerns with him.
All right. So here we go with Russell Wilson. I love this guy. One of the most underrated quarterbacks in the NFL, in my opinion. I think this guy's overlooked. Quietly had his best season as a passer last year, 35 touchdown passes to only 7 interceptions. He had a career best quarterback rating last year of 110.9, which is interesting. A lot of people might think that's a fluke, but it's not. His career quarterback rating is 100.3. All time, that's number 2. He's the number 2 quarterback all time with a quarterback rating with only, who's ahead of him? Aaron Rodgers, right? That's ahead of players like Joe Montana, Steve Young, Dan Marino, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, you name it. This guy has been great. Now, if we look in his career, he's had a weak supporting cast in terms of his offensive line, at times wide receivers, yet it never slowed his production. He's been a mark of consistency. Now, he's had some concerns at wide receiver, right? But yeah, last year, even with Doug Baldwin hurt, less than 100%, missing a lot of time, it didn't hurt his numbers overall. He still thrived with the team's new commitment to the run. I actually like it. I think his team's commitment to the run, what it's going to do is maybe lower his overall passing yards. It's going to keep him healthier. It's going to put him in the red zone more often. I think it's going to be offset once again. I think the commitment to the run is actually going to make him a better quarterback. Lockett took a next step forward last year. He had 900 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns. And the addition of Ricky Metcalf, that wide receiver, I think he's going to develop a nice possession receiver, and I think a great complement to Lockett in that offense there. For years, this offensive line was bad. He was hit more than any quarterback for a stretch there, but yet he still thrived. Once again, it doesn't matter what position you put him in, he thrived. Looks like you have something you want to say there.
No, I do, and this just goes back to what you said earlier. The commitment to the running game is going to improve Russell Wilson as a passer. That's not just an opinion. That's a fact. What was the storyline with Seattle Seahawks last year? 20% of the time they're running a 6th offensive line. They're really committing to the running game. They're throwing the ball less. You know what happened? It just meant that Russell Wilson was making more efficient and bigger plays. Touchdowns were, instead of throwing 5 passes for 5 yards each, he was throwing 1 pass for 25 yards each. I mean, it was just opening up the field for him so much more. We saw it last year. We're going to see it again this year. This is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL talent-wise. And, of course, I think you're going to talk more about some of the wide receiver talent there for sure.
Yeah, but, I love the commitment to run. What it meant is play action became effective and defenses couldn't tee off him, which is what they did for years there. Last year, the league's 4th best quarterback rating under pressure. He's had 30 touchdown passes 3 of the last 4 seasons. He's athletic. He can run. Now, he does it less recently, but he's still very good in that area. Can still run if he needs to. Feels like he's been in the league forever, yet he's only 30, just like Andrew Luck. And in quarterback years, that's like being in your mid-20s. He's a great teammate. He works hard. He's smart. Now, we have mentioned that this guy's the mark of consistency. Now, if you get into some of the metrics, or what we call some of those numbers, or the game within the game, right? A lot of sites will begin to break down, for example, the quarterback's ability to throw with a clean pocket, or when he's under pressure, or they take into account what they call adjusted completion percentage, and we won't get into all what that means. They'll look at stats like deep passes, when kept clean, and they look at all these kind of metrics. And when you break it down, a lot of times players will fluctuate statistically in that where they rank. All those categories, he's in the top 5 in almost all those categories. Once again, he's just consistent. He's got a very safe floor. Now, probably not as high of a ceiling, let's say, maybe than Mahomes or Rodgers, but this guy's floor is very safe. He's what I would call good money. I like this guy. So I like Lockett's progression. I like that they drafted Metcalf. I think that's a huge boost for them. I like Russell Wilson. I think he's very underrated. Anything you want to add to that?
No, of course I like Lockett, and of course they go out and they draft a wide receiver and add some weapons, and really it's the same story another year. There's another year where he's going to have 30 to 35 touchdown passes. He's a safe pick. He's a solid guy in this spot. He absolutely deserves to be here at number 4. I think it's perfect. All right, so here we are, Deshaun Watson. Why does Deshaun Watson come in here at fantasy quarterback number 5? What do we really think about him? I know that there are some concerns with that offensive line. We're going to address that. But for starters, it wasn't really much of a problem for him last year. In fact, he finished 4th in fantasy among fantasy quarterbacks last year with 331.9 fantasy points. That is 20.7 fantasy points per game for anyone that was keeping track at home or wondering. So that right there bodes really well for him. On top of that, among quarterbacks with at least 570 passing attempts, Watson finished 3rd in passer rating with a passer rating of 103. He finished 3rd in yards per attempt with 8.2 yards per attempt, and 4th with a completion percentage of 68%. So those metrics right there, what he's able to do with the ball, his quarterback rating, the average yards per play, the completion percentage, those are efficient numbers that he's managing, and I really like that. But on top of that, he's really effective on the ground as a running quarterback, and that's going to give him a huge boost over some of the other guys in this list who are great quarterbacks, but not quite as good rushing quarterbacks. So last year he had 99 rushes for 550 yards and 5 touchdowns. All of those ranked 3rd among fantasy quarterbacks. That right there is huge and kind of helped boost him over the last couple of guys in this tier 1. Now, it's really impressive that he did this, and this is one of the big things that shocks me. As I talked about earlier, if a guy finishes 1st in dropbacks and 1st in passing attempts, it's like, well, that was a great year, that's awesome, but is he going to get that same volume next year, right? And can he repeat that? That's not a concern with Deshaun Watson. He finished 8th in dropbacks and 15th in passing attempts. It's so surprising to see a guy who finishes 15th in attempts also finished 4th in fantasy points. That's because he just gets the job done. He's one of those guys, he's just able to work with whatever you give him. One nice thing to look at is the offensive line play can't get any worse. They're the worst rated pass blocking offensive line, run blocking offensive line, and the 20th pass blocking. Of course, that led to his 61 sacks and 60 scrambles, which were both most in the NFL. Of course, that's always a bit of a concern, but it's probably going to get better. I mean, you highly doubt that coaching staff is seriously just going to ignore that. As much as that's been a problem, as much as that's been a concern, the last thing I really want to say, because I know you want to say something, Rob, which is his athleticism has made that not as much of a problem as it would be for other quarterbacks. He is so athletic and so good at scrambling that he had 381 dropbacks, which lasted over 2.5 seconds. That is the 2nd most dropbacks of over 2.5 seconds in the NFL last year. This guy buys time. He gets the job done. And again, I think he's going to repeat as a top 5 fantasy quarterback this year.
Yeah, so there's a lot of hype coming out of year 1 with him, and he dipped last year as far as expectations go. But if you look at it, he actually started the year slower, and part of that could be the fact he's recovering from off-season surgery. But if you look at his last 8 to 10 games, he was off the charts. His quarterback rating was going up. He was very successful. If you take those numbers projected out, he had a really phenomenal year that second half of the year there. So
yeah, and then absolutely, which is the thing. The other thing being, he actually was better as far as his passer rating goes. He didn't have quite as many touchdowns, but he was more efficient. He was more effective. He was more a coachable quarterback that you love from a game plan perspective. But then really the last thing you got to say is, what about the injuries, man? I mean, we've got Will Fuller that was getting hurt. Hopkins was banged up. Kiki Kuti was hurt. They had to go out and get Demaryius Thomas, who seemed like a bit of a bust. I mean, that wide receiving core was not a wonderful wide receiving core, and a healthier corpse there is going to really help him out this year. And that really, for me, is one of those extra things, just a nice cherry on top that just makes me feel a little bit more safe with this guy.
All right. Drew Brees, the Hall of Famer, obviously this guy's going to make it to the Hall of Fame, first ballot, no doubt. He's at the age 40, so he's kind of on that bubble. Is this the year that he loses it? Can we trust him? How many years does he have left? I would trust him for 2019, and I'll tell you why. One, if you look at quarterbacks like Favre and Manning and Brady, showing they can be successful late into their careers. And so far, we've seen nothing to indicate that he's slowing down or that he's on the downside of his career in terms of decreased production there. But let's look at some stuff. 2017, he did see what we would call a decrease in touchdown passes, right? One, I don't think it was his fault. I think a lot of it is the fact that they had a very good running game that year. In fact, if you look at Kamara and Ingram, they gobbled up 20 rushing touchdowns. Those are ones that he lost that would have been turned into passing touchdowns there. Also, that year, if you study 2017, the second half of that year, that defense became very good. They struggled the first 4 or 5 games, and then they really started to pick it up. And in the second half, that defense was very good, meaning he didn't need to throw the ball as much. But if you look at all the other metrics that break down that year, completion percentage, quarterback rating, things like that, he had a very good year there. In fact, he's had 4 consecutive years with a quarterback rating over 100 with a career best last year of 115. You look at his 3 consecutive seasons with his completion percentage over 70. This guy's like he's getting better. He's like a fine wine. He ages with time, he gets better, right? Last year's completion percentage was 74, breaking the all-time record for completion percentage in a single season. The previous mark of 72 was held by, do you know?
Drew Brees.
Drew Brees. So he's just breaking his own records as he goes on and gets older. He's the career leader in completion percentage among all quarterbacks. He's a career passing yards leader. Last 11 years, one time he's blown 30 touchdown passes in a season. You throw in their great weapons, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara. These guys have great hands. They're extremely dangerous weapons to throw to. Look out for this guy. Another thing I like this year, they had Jared Cook at tight end. I think it's going to give him a solid target at quarterback there. They've been trying to replace Jimmy Graham for a while, and they failed with tries like Colby Fleener. But I think that Jared Cook is going to be a very solid option for him, a huge boost. There's no reason why he doesn't go out and throw 30 touchdown passes and have at least 4,500 yard passing yards this year. Once again, the guy's been the consummate professional. He's great. Anything you want to add? Anything you disagree there?
No. Hall of Famer, awesome weapons, arguably the best weapons in the NFL. Great system, consistency, getting the job done. I almost like that they lost their number 2 running back there in Ingram, just because that's less rushing touchdowns for him to have to worry about. I think Latavius Murray is a bit of a downgrade, but I guess that's a conversation for another day. Really no arguments here. Another guy where we spent a lot of time wrestling through where to put him, and this seems to be exactly the spot.
All right. Let's get into one that we agree with where he's ranked, but we don't agree with his tier. Let's get into it.
All right, so here we are with the last player in Tier 1, and that is Matt Ryan. We both agree that he should be the 7th quarterback ranked, but I believe he's Tier 1, and Rob, I think you said you wanted him Tier 2. Is that correct?
I did want him Tier 2. I'll briefly share why, and then you can get into your thing. I like Matt Ryan. 2 of the last 3 years, this guy's been phenomenal. But that's the key, 2 of the last 3 years. For me, Tier 1 is a guy that I think is a lock that I can trust. If you look at before a couple years ago when he has MVP season 2, he was a good quarterback, wasn't a great quarterback in terms of fantasy. And so for me, I just like a little bit more consistency. I also think they're going to get some weapons back on defense. They struggled with a lot of injuries there. An improved defensive play might decrease the need for them to throw a lot. But I love the guy, I really do. And, you're going to get into it. But the addition of Calvin Ridley really solidifies him as a quarterback that you can trust. But get into your stuff.
Absolutely. Boom. We start off in 2016. He's the number 1 fantasy quarterback. He is hot. He's insane. Let's forget the Super Bowl. He's amazing. Then he goes into 2017, and it's like complete bust. It's like Jekyll and Hyde. Who is this guy? Come back into 2018. According to Fantasy Pros, he is the number 2 overall fantasy quarterback with 354 fantasy points, averaging 22.1 fantasy points per game, kind of the Matt Ryan that we know from 2016. And Calvin Ridley seems to be a bit of that missing piece. I'm going to talk about that later. But finished 4th most dropbacks with 669. He finished 3rd in attempts with 609. He finished 3rd in yards with just shy of 5,000. And he also had 35 passing touchdowns. He finished 5th in his deep passer rating with a deep passer rating of 114. I mean, the numbers are phenomenal. But why are the numbers phenomenal? Why is 2018 different from 2017? And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Calvin Ridley in particular in a second. But first, I want to talk about as a whole. as I mentioned, there's a lot of guys on this team. The Chiefs, there's the Saints. There's a lot of players, quarterbacks with some seriously good offensive weapons that could be argued for the best weapons in the NFL. But one of them has got to be Atlanta. Last year, 7 Atlanta Falcons players generated a passer rating of over 100 when targeted by Matt Ryan. That almost means, you could almost say, it's a bit of a stretch, but you could almost say that he has 7 reliable passing options. I wouldn't quite go that far, but he has some of the most consistent and depth at targeting options in the NFL. And as we know, we've really shifted into an NFL where if you want to be a good quarterback, you can't throw to the same guys every single play. You got to spread the ball around. Tom Brady does that so well and has helped keep that pretty much weaponless offense going. But of course, we know Julio Jones has been fantastic. He has finished first in yards per route in 5 of the last 6 seasons. That means he is the most efficient. When he goes out there to start running a route, he's getting more yards than anybody else. I mean, Julio Jones is the man. He's the PPR stud. He is the guy. Last year, he seemingly finally started to figure out his touchdown problem, and that really comes because he's not getting double teams. He's not getting shaded over as much. He's not getting so much attention from defenses because Calvin Ridley has come in and has been one of the best rookie wide receivers that we have seen in a very, very long time. Calvin Ridley last year had 10 touchdowns as a rookie wide receiver. That is the first time since 2014 and only the 4th time since Randy Moss did it in 1998. Not only that, but he wasn't just finding the end zone. He generated a passer rating of 125.8. That is second best in the NFL among qualifying wide receivers. That number is insanely high. I posted about this on our Instagram recently, but Calvin Ridley seems to be the missing piece, the guy that puts them over the edge. If it weren't for Calvin Ridley, Matt Ryan wouldn't be a tier 1. But Calvin Ridley is one of the better, maybe the best young wide receiver in the NFL. And I think he really solidifies that position and puts him over top into this tier 1. But I certainly agree with you. He could be a tier 2. And I like him that we agree still with the spot. But anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think that he's a solid play. Once again, though, most likely, as we're looking through these quarterbacks, the first 6, 7 guys we named, I'd love to have any one of these guys on my roster, but I probably won't because I know they'll get hyped up. Guys will take them early. I'll be patient, so I'll end up with probably none of these guys on my roster, even though I love all 7 of these guys. But
exactly. Let's move on to the number 8 guy.
So here we go. We're into our tier 2. A lot of these guys in tier 2 are right on that bubble. They could have been tier 1. The first guy, for example, I'm going to talk about Baker Mayfield in a bit. Yeah, I really struggle with. He had such a great year. But when I come to tier 1 guys, these are guys that I can trust beyond a shadow of a doubt. In tier 2, there's a few question marks there. So do you want to add in a little bit there, or should we get right into our tier 2 guys?
No, I completely agree with that. There's just a slight bit of anxiousness or risk or whatever you want to call it, or just hesitation. These guys have that much talent. But pick them just a round or 2 later. Secure some other positions first and then take these guys. That's really essentially what tier 2 is. It's tier 1 with a caveat. Really, that seems to be what it is, at least in my mind. Let's get through it. Our number 8 through 11 picks.
Baker Mayfield, it's really hard to put him in tier 2 because this guy had a phenomenal year last year as a rookie, but his sample size is smaller. The question for me is, okay, does he become Pat Mahomes, who exploded his second year, or does he become like so many other quarterbacks that slumped a little bit once teams had some game film and time to prepare for them? I like to play it safe. I play it closer to the vest. For that reason, I put him in tier 2. With that said, I'm very excited to see what this guy can do in a full season there. He has 27 touchdown passes last year, most ever by a rookie quarterback, and yet he only started 13 games. The guy would hit 30 if he played a full season. And some of those games were with Jackson as head coach, and Jackson really hurt that team. The offensive coordinator, Williams, hurt that team. You look at his last 7 games, though, he had a quarterback rating of 102. That put him 7th in the league among qualified quarterbacks during that stretch. He got better as the year went on. During that same stretch, he had 3 games that he threw 3 touchdown passes per game, and 1 game with 4. His last game versus a very solid Ravens defense, he threw for 376 yards, almost 700 yards. Wouldn't that be some? 376 passing yards. That's a phenomenal game there. Now they have a new head coach. Kitchens took over. He was the offensive coordinator that took over once Jackson was let go of. And that offense with him as offensive coordinator really took off. Now with him taking over as the head coach, I think we can expect a very similar offense, very similar results, except they've had some key weapons that we'll get to in just a second there. I think they'll have a sophomore adjustment, but this guy's legitimate. One, I like, David Njoku in his 3rd season is coming along very well, but they added Odell Beckham. Odell Beckham is huge. Odell Beckham is one of the greatest wide receivers. Whether you like his attitude or not, put that aside. He's one of the greatest wide receivers that's ever stepped on the field. He's phenomenal. But it's more than what he brings. There's a domino effect in that offense because now that allows a guy like Jarvis Landry to become the number 2 guy. He doesn't have to face number 1 corners or double teams anymore, and now his numbers are going to be better. So just that whole offense is going to improve there. I love this guy. If you're in a dynasty league, he's got a huge value. I love Baker Mayfield. Anything you want to add, take away from that?
No, I like that. I wish I could have talked about him. And like you said, he increased. He got so much better, so much more value. His fantasy value increased so much when Hugh Jackson left. No offense to that guy, but really, when you look at the numbers, I talked about it months ago, so I don't remember the exact number at this point. But once the new head coach took over, once they got rid of Hugh Jackson, Baker Mayfield was actually on pace for, I believe it was like 38 to 40 touchdowns over the whole season that year. Of course, he didn't get that for a lot of reasons. But again, but sometimes I think we really underestimate the value of getting a proper coach in there. In fact, one of the best examples of that is when the Rams switched from Fisher to Sean McVay. They went from the worst offense in the NFL to probably the best offense in the NFL in a single season. Mm-hmm. I think that right there tells you exactly how important it is. But yeah, Baker Mayfield deserves to be in this spot. High upside, but just got some downside you got to watch out for. All right, so here we have Carson Wentz. This guy is the Jekyll and Hyde of the NFL. He comes on the field, he's absolute, he's a monster, he's insane. This guy has got some huge fantasy value, and then he gets hurt and he disappears and you can't rely on him. And he's done it 2 seasons in a row, so it's starting to become almost a pattern that people are getting afraid of. Last year he played in 11 games. He threw for over 3,000 yards on 7.7 yards per attempt, 21 touchdowns, and a solid and improved pass rating of 102.2. He was on pace for 4,400 yards and 30 touchdowns, a pretty good season. Very much echoes the season of 2017, where he played 13 games, had 3,300 yards, 7.5 yards an attempt, 33 touchdowns on a pass rating of 102, where that year he was on pace for over 4,000 yards and 41 touchdowns. Really, the question with him, the concern with him is the injury, and that's all I'm going to address with this, because you really cannot begin to evaluate who he is as a fantasy option to you until you know how you feel about him and you know how you feel about his injury in particular. So here is what I found. Now, unfortunately, there was not a lot of recent information on this. I'm not sure if that's a good sign, if that's a bad sign, if that's not a sign at all, but it's been really hard to find recent information in the last couple of weeks, in the last month or two on this guy, and I think that's a good sign because it probably just means that he is recovering naturally, and that's really what some of this is going to say. So let me read this here. It says, a recent CT scan on Carson Wentz's back revealed a fractured vertebrae that, if allowed time to rest, would fully heal without further expected issues. That was an ESPN source, Adam Schefter. He also continued on to say that there will be continued evaluation to determine. This was back in the season, by the way, where he had said there was actually going to be continued evaluation to see if continuing to play will make the injury worse. They decided not to continue to play him, but it was still determined that if he had continued to play, it would have made the injury a little bit worse, but that he would not need surgery. And Coach Doug Peterson also said kind of the similar thing. This was after the season ended, though, so even more recently. He said, here's all that I can confirm, which is that he has a stress injury. That is a thing that has evolved over time and requires 0 surgery to heal. Now, here's the thing. These guys have all the money in the world. These teams have the best doctors, the best medical professionals. If surgery was even a little bit helpful, they would have done it. And so I think it's a very good sign that this isn't going to require surgery. However, an ACL tear and a cracked vertebrae in his back or whatever, those are some bad injuries. Those are some things for you to consider as you look forward with kind of weighing the pros and cons of this guy. He is one of those guys on this list that has huge upside and huge downside, and you really have to evaluate how much of a risk you want to take on him.
Yeah, it's the injury is obviously an issue you can't ignore, but this guy's still young. I think we have very short memories. Mm-hmm. This was a guy that a couple years ago, before he got injured, he had a phenomenal record. He was the clear MVP leader at that point. If he doesn't get injured, I believe he wins the MVP hands down that year. If you look at his yards per game, you look at his touchdowns per game, some of those different things. You look at his quarterback rating, he's been improving. And he hasn't had a running game. At times they struggled. They brought in Jay Ajayi last year, and he was out. And so I think there's a lot of things there that have been working against him. But I really like this guy. Once again, still very young. A couple years ago, he was the darling of the NFL. and how quickly we forget. Guys like Pat Mahomes come along, and then he just gets shelved for the next new model.
Pretty much, yeah, that seems to be the case. But all the athleticism there's, all the talent is there. He's even got a pretty good situation of wide receiving corps, pretty good talent. He's got 2 good tight ends. Everything seems to be in place. The health is what's not in place. That's what we're going to have to evaluate as this offseason continues. And that is why, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to update our website and we're going to have our rankings live, because we're going to be able to update once a week or every few days or whenever something new comes out and be able to tell you what's going on with Carson Wentz. And that's what really matters. This is one of those situations where we can tell you where to rank him, but that's just going to change based on the medical professionals and the information that comes out this offseason. But anything else you have to say, or you want to get on to your number 10 guy here?
Yeah, I'll get to my next guy. Jared Goff. I'm not sure how much I specifically love Jared Goff, but I love the system he's in, and Coach McVay is an offense genius. Together, they're great. In his 3rd season, he improved his quarterback rate and touchdown passes, completion percentage, passing yards per game, all that after a huge jump in his 2nd year. He's averaged 30 touchdown passes the last 2 seasons. He even increased his rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, although I'll say this, I don't think running the ball and having rushing touchdowns are really going to be a big part of his game moving forward. I think it's more of a fluke there. Now, he did have some playoff struggles, but he's still only 24 years old. He's still learning the game. He's still maturing. He's a baby in terms of like quarterback years there at 24. So I think we'll see him continue to mature there. And I think his struggles down the stretch were primarily due to Cooper Kupp being out and Todd Gurley knee issues. Well, at some point this season, Cooper Kupp's going to be back, and Todd Gurley, they diagnosed that he has arthritis in his knee. According to doctors, according to reports, it's something he has to manage, but is not career or season threatening at this point. So I think it's just something he's going to have to manage. That's it. As far as Cooper Kupp goes, consider some things here. One, by all accounts, sounds like he's on target to be back for week 1. I know you had some pushback on one of your videos by guys like he's not going to play this year, but all the reports are he's going to be ready for week 1. In fact, coming out of camp there, everything indicates he's going to be ready for week 1. He didn't get the green light to completely participate in team organized activities, but he was there for all of them. He did some on-the-field work, and he even participated 11-on-11 drills. Now, it wasn't full speed, but he was out there. He's done enough to show that he's on track for week 1. Consider this, through week 11, before Kupp went down, Goff, okay, he was crushing it. Through the first 11 weeks, he had 26 touchdown passes. He was on pace for 38 with only 6 interceptions. He was 3rd behind Mahomes and Brees for passer grade by Pro Football Focus at 92.1. He was the 3rd quarterback. After that, it dropped from 92.1 down to 56.3, left him 34th in the league. During his last 5 games, he only had 6 touchdown passes and he had 6 interceptions. So you see the huge impact, and you really highlighted that in your video. Cooper Kupp is one of the best slot receivers in the NFL. He'll be back, huge boost. If you look at the Rams offense, they finished 1st and 2nd the last 2 years in scoring, average 31.4 points per game. That offense is going to finish in the top 5 again this year, and Goff will be a huge benefactor of it. And so once again, it's not that I'm saying I'm in love with this guy. I like him, but I love the situation that he is in. Anything you want to say?
No, exactly. And that's where this is the guy who's benefited from a great system. He's not making the system great, but he's keeping up with the system. He's not a weak link. And then again, much like with the Carson Wentz situation, I like to sit back and to watch. And the last second, as often as I can, I always go into my drafts, pull up my phone, and what's the injury reports for the players, in particular, Todd Gurley and Cooper Kupp, and seeing how they're going to be. But again, someone was giving me pushback the other day. I love the pushback, but redeemed. As soon as I got the pushback, it was like an hour later, boom, information was posted on how he's been playing, how he's been practicing, and how healthy Cooper Kupp has been. And that's really, for me, kind of the key factor for Jared Goff.
Okay.
All right, so here we come in at number 11. Now, we absolutely called it last year when we said that he was going to be Ben Roethlisberger was going to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. He ended up finishing top 5, and we were correct. We made the right pick there, sure enough. But he drops all the way down to 11 here. Why is that? Well, that's pretty obvious, and I think everyone knows it. Antonio Brown is leaving, and that's the situation I want to address. It's the same Ben Roethlisberger. He's not too old. He's not too injured. He's got the same weapons. Everything is identical. So this is really the drop from a top 5 guy, top 6 guy, to number 11 is Antonio Brown. That's what we need to talk about right now. Right now, he is forced with a very difficult situation of replacing what has been consistently his number one weapon and consistently been the number one fantasy wide receiver in the NFL since 2011. It's been Antonio Brown. Statistically, there is no arguing it whatsoever. The numbers are there. He's got to replace 169 targets, 104 catches, 1,300 yards, and 15 touchdowns. That's a lot to replace. There's a reason he's dropping down on these rankings. That's going to drastically affect that offense right there. I mean, when you're a quarterback dropping back and you're looking out, you're trying to find your wide receivers who you want to throw to and what you want to do, and you have 169 less times that you can go to one of the best receivers in the NFL, that is going to make for a major drop-off. However, I don't think that it's going to make for a massive, huge, crazy drop-off where all of a sudden Ben Roethlisberger sucks. And I'll tell you why. There were some actually interesting statistics last year on Antonio Brown that suggest he might be a little bit overrated, and this year could even be a bit of a bust for him. Not only did Antonio Brown generate a passer rating of just 90 when he was targeted, which isn't very good. That's actually 59th in the NFL. Now, when you put it among qualifying wide receivers, it bumps up to 30 because there are a lot of guys who only did that on only 20 targets or so. But still, 59 wide receivers generated a better passer rating when targeted than him. And Ben Roethlisberger threw 14 touchdowns last year. 11 of those touchdowns came when targeting Antonio Brown. Those are some bad numbers. Those are some concerns. I certainly think, and maybe this is a bold prediction by me, but I think that Juju Smith, even if Brown would have stayed, Juju Smith's probably working into being the better wide receiver. Maybe it's age-wise, maybe he's slowing down, whatever reason. And so he's still got his number one guy. He's still got a couple of tight ends to work with in the offense and the scheme. Everything is right. Everything is good for him, but just the loss of a key wide receiver drops him down to still a fantasy starter, but not quite the fantasy top level guy that he was last year. So that's Ben Roethlisberger for you here at number 11.
Yeah, there's some good quarterbacks there. I mean, I think Ben's still going to have a good year there. You could even bump him up, maybe 8, 9 around that range there. But once again, there's so much competition for good quarterbacks. But I think it matters. I like Juju Smith-Schuster, by the way. Seems like he's a great young man, good attitude. Antonio Brown brings a lot of drama. I hope it works out well for Juju. But I think where it hurts him a little bit there, it's nice to, last year Juju was the number 2 guy, and now you got to find that number 2 wide receiver. Once again, I think there's just a little bit of a question mark there, going to bump him down, but I still like him. He's in a great offense that's catered to Ben Roethlisberger, and I think that's going to be a huge boost there. So,
well, let's get to your number 12 guy. That rounds out our starters essentially, so I'm excited to see and hear you talk about this guy.
Yeah. So this is Tier 3. These are guys, I don't want to talk too long about what we define as Tier 3, and the fact there's just a little more question marks there. I believe in the Tier 3, there's a lot of good values. In fact, that's probably where I'll land with when I start in quarterbacks when I get into fantasy season. So I have no problem taking Tier 3s, although you have to be prepared for some uncertainties. Anything you want to add to that?
No, Tier 3s are essentially Tier 2 quarterbacks, but you're not going to start them in tough matchups. You're going to do maybe a bit more streaming, and you're not going to reach for them at all in the draft. You're going to let whichever one falls to you, falls to you.
Yep.
It's pretty much what it is. So let's get to your guy.
Talk about Cam Newton here. Okay, so he's entering his 9th season. He is big and he is physical, and that's kind of allowed him to play bigger than most quarterbacks. But regardless of his size, this guy's taking a beating. I think it's starting to catch up to him a little bit there. He's been beat up quite a bit. I'm sure the team would love him to take less hits, to decrease that on his body, the amount of pounding that it's taking there. Hopefully keep him healthy, keep him on the field there. I think that would be ideal. The problem with it is his running is what's made him a good fantasy quarterback. And so you decrease the amount of hits he's going to take. He's not going to run the ball as much. That really brings down his fantasy value there. He's only averaged 22.75 passing touchdowns per season. That's it. That's not that great. What's carried him in fantasy is his rushing touchdowns. 58 rushing touchdowns in his career. In 8 years, that means 7.25 rushing touchdowns per season. Now, if you take his rushing touchdowns and you convert them into passing touchdowns and you add them to his current passing touchdowns, right, that equates to him throwing 33.6 touchdown passes per season. That's really good numbers, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The concern that I'm having, we're already seeing a decline in his rushing touchdowns the past few years. In his first 5 seasons, he averaged 8.6 per season. His last 3, only 5 per season. So we're already seeing a decrease in that a little bit. 2 of his last 3 years, his lowest rushing numbers. So I think those numbers begin to dip a little bit there, which means he needs to be a better pocket quarterback, a better pocket passer to continue to have fantasy value, yet he's coming off of 2 shoulder surgeries. So a little concerns there. Now, he does have some young, talented wide receivers around him. I think wide receivers that have high ceilings, but they still need to mature and to grow into that. They're not proven yet. Now, he does have the best pass-catching running back. Now, you look at Christian McCaffrey last year, just shattered shatters maybe a strong word, but he broke the record for most receptions by a running back per season. That's a huge boost for him there. So what's my take on this guy? Where should you take him? Where should I take him? When I look at Cam Newton, I think this. He's an athlete first, quarterback second. Only once in his career he's had over 24 touchdown passes. Although last year, if he played the last 2 games, he probably would have broke that. I think he's a solid play in fantasy, but for me, his ceiling's a little bit lower. I don't mind him at quarterback. I wouldn't mind having him next year. But here's what I think is going to happen. A lot of owners are going to think back to his MVP season of 2015 and reach for this guy. I think he's a good quarterback if you can get him at the right price. So.
Exactly. With the concerns because of injury and the fact that he's 12, right? We put him at 12. The fact that he's barely a fantasy starter says I'm probably going to wait a little longer and get another guy that I feel more confident on, or just stream from week to week. I don't think that he's worth the risk at where you're going to have to take him, but I'm not bashing him as a quarterback. He's a very athletic quarterback, and I think Carolina's lucky to have him. But that's really all I've got to say on it. It's a pretty simple situation, just some nerves, and I'm just going to wait a little bit longer on him. So here we are, number 13, Kirk Cousins. I don't got a lot to say on this guy. He scored the 16th in fantasy points per game last season, and so he ranks 13th. That makes perfect sense. He had 40 sacks, 17 batted balls, 17 dropped passes, and the 6th worst pass blocking offensive line in the NFL. The numbers aren't great. Why does he go from 16th up to 13th? The improved blocking, the center that the Vikings went out and got, and the fact that at the beginning of last year, their offensive line coach died just before the season started. Having a full offensive line coach going into the season and not having that massive hit, having an improved center and another year playing for the Vikings is going to boost him a bit, but not a whole lot. Again, let's not remember Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, some of the most prolific and talented wide receivers in the NFL. But there's just too many question marks, and he just didn't get it done quite enough last season. He was too hit or miss in games. He'd throw 4 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, none. It was all over the place, and so he's definitely one of those stream-first sort of quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's funny. Kirk Cousins, this guy's fallen so far down. His average draft position is way below this. I think he's going to be a steal for a lot of teams out there. He had a bad season throwing 30 touchdown passes. That's crazy. Now, I know that he was inconsistent. I don't care about his inconsistencies, and I'll tell you why. Yes, one game he'd throw 300 yards and have 5 touchdown passes. And then the next game he'd go out with 225 and 1 and maybe 2 picks, right? And that kills you. But here's the thing. Stats are stats. Numbers are numbers. It all works out in the end. And what I mean by that is, yeah, that one game where he only had 225 yards and 1 touchdown pass, you could use better numbers. But the game that he has 300 yards, throws 5 touchdowns, he carries your team. Yeah. So it just balances itself out. I don't really care. This guy had 30 touchdown passes, and like you mentioned, Dalvin Cook is a good pass-catching back. Thielen, Diggs, you got Rudolph back. They drafted Irv Smith, that tight end who's got good hands. I mean, there's a lot of weapons there. The offensive line's getting better. I think this guy is being overlooked. I think he was overhyped last year, and I just put the expectation too high for this guy. He can never meet up with it. So I like Kirk Cousins, but here's the thing. We got him ranked here, but you can probably let him fall later on and grab this guy because I think most teams are going to overlook him.
I saw a site, and I laughed so hard. Rated him 27th as fantasy quarterback. I was just shocked.
That's crazy. Yeah, don't go to that site. I don't know what site it was.
We're not telling you. Don't go there.
Yeah,
stay here. But anyways, let's move on to our next guy. That seems to be just about it for him.
Yeah, we're going to speed up with some of our net evaluation here because we're getting to the place where we're going to get really quickly to the quarterbacks that, quite honestly, except for bye weeks or injuries, or if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you shouldn't really use. Honestly, we strongly believe you don't have a backup quarterback on your bench. Your bench space is for running backs, wide receivers, things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to go great in depth on the 25th quarterback because he's not going to play. He's not going to start for you. It doesn't matter. But we completely understand that you guys want in-depth information. That's what we do here at the Fantasy Football Prophet. So drop a comment down below if you want more, and I'll make sure to send you even more information. But let's keep this video rolling.
All right. So here's another guy I think that's underrated. Although he's been moving up, at one point his average draft position was about 22 to 24. Now it's down to 17. I still think it's too low, but I think people are starting to trend with him a little bit. He's got underrated mobility. Last year, 421 rushing yards and 3 rushing TDs, and that was only in 14 games. He had great progression in season 2. He threw for 24 touchdown passes in only 14 games. Yet if you look at last year and you broke it down, the first 3 games he was bad, but after that he was a totally different player, having a quarterback rating over 100 those remaining games. During that same stretch there, after the first 3 games, he had 22 touchdown passes to only 9 interceptions those 11 games. Of course, you know that projects out to be 32 touchdown passes over 16 games. That's really good there. He was 6th in quarterback rating during play action. This is a guy that thrived in play action. The coach went on the offseason, really wanted to improve that running game, to improve the play action, some other things to bring more consistency. He brought in Davis. They drafted Montgomery. I think that's very helpful for him. Look at Matt Nagy. His creativity, and I think the team's improved running game is going to really help his maturation process there. You look at Allen Robinson. Many of our videos we talked about the last 8 games for Allen Robinson. As he got healthier and developed chemistry, he's really off the charts. Looked very good there. I think he's going to really become a number 1 wide receiver and give him a target there. You had Anthony Miller. He's got good upside. You look at Tariq Cohen's dangerous in the passing game. I think there's a lot of things there. I think Mitch Trubisky is a guy that you can really trust this year, and I think he'll be a sleeper for a lot of people. There we go.
All right, so here we have Phillip Rivers here at number 15. Phillip Rivers is one of those NFL players, fantasy players, that's almost got a cult following. And so the question I want to address is, why isn't he ranked higher if he's such a good all-time quarterback? And he is. All-time, he stacks up with some really good quarterbacks. He really does. However, he's going to be 38 years old this season. He's averaging 33 sacks and 26 drops per season over his entire career. According to pass blocking ratings by Pro Football Focus, he has the 2nd worst pass blocking offensive line, and he finished only 14th in fantasy points per game last year. All those things said, all those things come together. He does have some weapons, and he's a good quarterback, but there's a lot going against him, and I don't trust that offense. I don't trust that he's consistently year after year not been quite that high. And again, at 38 years old, 33 sacks is a lot of hits to take. So I think we got to keep him here at number 15, especially considering all the talent ahead of him.
Yeah, he's a guy I think that year in, year out, he just people overlook. He's left out there. He's a great pickup. He's just a mark of consistency. You talk about overrated or underrated. Definitely that guy. I want to talk about Dak Prescott a little bit here. At one point last season, it was really hard to imagine. This guy was Rookie of the Year in 2016. He looked terrible. You go back to his rookie year, though, he really deserved Rookie of the Year there. He had a quarterback rating of 105. He had 23 touchdown passes, only 4 interceptions. Now, you add to that 6 rushing touchdowns as a rookie. He was great, composed, athletic, good arm, very reminiscent of Russell Wilson for me when I watched them play. But in reality, Dak's rookie season was actually better than Russell Wilson's. Now, if we look at the two, you look at Russell Wilson, 5'11", 215, Dak 6'2", 235. Dak's bigger, which his bigger frame projects better for him. I mean, his body should be able to hold up better. I mean, he can continue to run the ball. I think you're going to see a lot of goal line touchdowns for him there. Many thought Dak was a bust in 2017, but early in 2017, he was actually looking really good. Through the first 6 games, he had 14 TDs, only 4 interceptions. That was on pace for 37 touchdown passes, but then what happened? Well, things went sideways. One of the things that went sideways for them is Ezekiel Elliott gets suspended down the stretch, and play action just goes away. If that was Ezekiel Elliott there, you don't have play action. It made it very easy for defenses to focus on him. Also, them injuries to the offensive line. While the offensive line is healthy, Ezekiel Elliott's back. Now that hangover that he had kind of carried over to 2018, right? The first 3 games, he looked like the Dak at the end of 2017, but then he turned it around, and he really took off with Amari Cooper. Dak's quarterback rating, once Amari Cooper got there, after the first 3 games, I should say, he had a quarterback rating of 103. He averaged 276 passing yards with Cooper there to only 202 without him. He had 20 touchdown passes, final 13 games, a quarterback rating of 101 during that stretch. In his legs, he's had 6 rushing touchdowns all 3 years in the league. You take those 6 rushing touchdowns, you convert that to passing touchdowns, that would be the equivalent of him throwing for 32, 31, and 31 touchdown passes first 3 seasons in the year. Once again, he's a guy that a lot of people overlook. He's not excited, but I think he's a quality play for you. And in the right matchups, he can be a huge boost. So
exactly. Matchup play. That's exactly what he is. So here we are. We got Jameis Winston. The fact of the matter is he didn't play the whole season, so it's hard to look at his stats straightforward and understand what he did. So let me tell you what he was on pace for. He was on pace for 40 sacks and 20 interceptions with the 10th worst pass blocking offensive line and the 4th worst run blocking offensive line. Things aren't looking good for a guy who last year, don't forget, pretty much lost his job twice. He pretty much lost it twice over. Once because he was playing bad and once because of off-field drama and the suspension or whatever was going on there. And so Jameis Winston at 17, very talented, not trustworthy.
Okay. There we go. I actually think this guy's got some sleeper appeal there, but
well, he does have some sleeper appeal, but again, according to his ADP and according to some of the things we're nervous about, 17 is where you could take him, but you could hope for some upside for sure.
Sleeper appeal though, but a lot of question marks undoubtedly. Let's talk about Tom Brady. Hall of Famer, considered by many to be the greatest of all time, the GOAT. Be 42 this season. He's still good. He can still make some throws, but there are reasons that I think he's going to begin to decline. I think we saw it last year a little bit. Last year he missed some throws, and he was very streaky. Look at these numbers. In 6 games, he had 19 touchdown passes, only 6 interceptions. The other 10 games, he only had 10 touchdown passes. Now, some of that was game script, Gronk being injured or out, Gordon not being fully integrated into that lineup. At some point, the guy's got to slow down. He's a great quarterback. And heading into last year, we said you could trust him. But I think this is the year that he's no longer what I call a viable option to start every week. I think he's still a guy that you can use. I think in the right matchups, he still has value. But I think he has to be viewed as a plug-and-play based on matchup, and here's why. One, he needs weapons. Gordon's suspended. Gronk's retired. They brought in Demaryius Thomas, who has an Achilles injury. That Achilles injury is hard to come by. I don't know when he's going to be available this year. And Demaryius Thomas was already declining. You could see that. He's not the Demaryius Thomas of years ago. They did draft a N'Keal Harry. I think that's going to help, but he's still an unproven rookie. So I think what's going to happen here, Brady's getting older, and I think that the Patriots and Belichick are going to focus on running the ball. I think you see very similar numbers of what he had in the first 6 seasons that he was in the league, which he was a good quarterback, but not a great fantasy quarterback. And remember, that offense that ran conservative the first 6 years won them 2 championships. So they don't need to have a great year for them to win. I like the guy, great player, maybe win another championship this year, but I'm not going to trust him as a fantasy starter. I may use him in matchup play.
All right, so here we are in tier 4. We're going all the way through 32. We are finishing out in this tier. This is the last tier we're going to talk about. There's not a lot of talent here. These guys have injury concerns, bad offenses, bad play as a whole. These guys have lost their jobs to other quarterbacks. This is not the best. There's some talent here. There's some guys who are young. There's some guys who have some potential, but there is so much concern that they are nothing more than at best a plug-and-play option. Number 19, we have Derek Carr. 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio is bad. Plus 51 sacks last year was 3rd worst in the NFL. I do not really like Derek Carr heading into this season just because of a lot of those concerns.
I say this a lot. I think that's some sleeper appeal there. I don't want to get into it because we're late in the video. He did better down the stretch there. They brought in Antonio Brown. He's definitely a guy I'm going to watch. We'll do a trending video. Guys are trending up and down, and we'll talk about some of these guys later on to see if we bump them up a little bit. But right now, you're right. There's a lot of question marks. My guy that you want me to talk about here is the darling for a lot of people, Jimmy Garoppolo. Next, Joe Montana. Time will tell. I guess he's the darling of San Francisco. But when you get past the hype and look at the numbers, he's got potential. But this guy's far from proven. I'll go a little bit longer than you there, but I'll talk fast, so bear with me. He built his resume in 2016 playing with New England. His quarterback rating was good. They used him conservatively, and he only started 2 games. His 9 games starting for San Francisco, right? His touchdown interception ratio was 12 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions. You project that over 16 games, that's 21-14 touchdown interception ratio. That's not that great. His legs aren't going to win you games. In his career, he's only got 54 rushing yards. Not that good. I do like the weapons he has there. Dante Pettis, obviously Kittle's a stud. Love that guy. I think he's got very good pass-catching backs with Breida, McKinnon, and Coleman. And I think Shanahan can work wonders with quarterbacks. So I think this guy's got a lot of potential. Somebody to keep an eye on, but do not draft this guy and expect to start him at all. He's a guy that you're going to monitor and watch. We'll keep you updated there. I would tell you that he's a bench stash, but what do we do what do we advise you to do in this? You never stash a quarterback. Build your bench in other positions. So I would stay away from him at this point. He's got a lot of potential, but that's it. We need him to prove it. So.
All right, here we have 21, Josh Allen. This guy averages a brutal only 6.5 yards per attempt. He only completed 52% of his passes, and he had a touchdown interception ratio of 10 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Seemingly every stat I looked at except his rushing was bad, and I'm sorry, but no matter how good your running is, it will never make up for only 10 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. That's why he's got to go at 21. He's young, he's athletic, he's got potential, but he's still here at 21 for a lot of reasons. We just don't have time to get into every one of them.
Okay, I got Matthew Stafford. So this guy in his career has had 2 or 3 years where he's had some good fantasy value, but I think this next season his value will be minimal. Matt Patricia is committed to winning games by running the ball and playing good defense. The offensive coordinator said they're committed to running the ball by using Anderson, Kerryon Johnson. So I think if you look at Stafford's old numbers, he had some good numbers, but they often were spiked due to the fact that the Lions had poor defense. He had to throw off, and I think that's not what they want. They want him to become a game manager. On the high value, everything fell into place perfectly for him. He could have 26, 28 touchdown passes. Sure, that could happen, but I think in some ways his floor is safe. But he easily, in that offense, with the weapons that he has, the approach, the philosophy of that team, could end up repeating last year's numbers with 21 touchdown passes once again. He's another plug and play here based on matchup, nothing more.
23, we have Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is Josh Allen, except better at running and worse at throwing. That's pretty much exactly what it is. He also has probably worse weapons and a more defensive and running-minded focused team. I think that is basically a downgrade on Josh Allen, essentially.
Yeah. Reports already come out of camp that he's overwhelmed with the offense this year. Once again, I know a lot of people are excited about him. I am not. I'm going to stay away from that guy. So I got Andy Dalton. I actually think there's sleeper appeal. I've said that a lot, haven't I?
You've said that too much.
Too much. I have. Sorry. Well, I think
everyone's a sleeper in your book.
That's right. That way I can always go back and say, hey, I said he was a sleeper. I think there's some sleeper appeal here. I'll tell you why. They got a new coach who's offensive minded. I think it'll bring some new innovation to an offense. Hopefully kickstart an offense that's been in the bottom third in the league many years during Marvin Lewis's tenure. I think their defense is bad. Last year, they're 30th in the NFL, allowing 28.4 points per game. Even if that defense improves, they're still going to be in the bottom third. That's going to mean they're going to win games. They're going to have to score a lot of points, throw the ball a lot there. I think they develop a Mixon is good. Wide receiver Boyd is a huge boost. And they're going to have A.J. Green back this year at 100%. In fact, Andy was having kind of a resurgence last year. He was on pace for 30 touchdown passes. So I think there's a little bit of hope that Andy Dalton might, if everything fell into place, he could be a sneaky play. But for me, he still sneaks into a plug-and-play based on matchups, or if you're in two-quarterback league, that's where I see him.
All right, at number 25, we have Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold threw 17 touchdowns last year and honestly looks to be better than a lot of these other guys like a Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. He does look to be better than them. Here's the thing. With the weapons and Adam Gase as the coach, I think he's probably the worst coach in the NFL. I'm going to say it right now. But he just has a lower ceiling than all these other guys. And I'm not going to draft this guy for his high ceiling of 20, right? I mean, being ranked at 20. I mean, that's really, he's capped off. 25, Sam Darnold stays here because he doesn't have as much potential as some of these other choices.
So I'm looking at rookie quarterback Kyler Murray of Arizona. Too much hype because, one, he's a rookie. Quarterback position is the hardest position in the NFL to learn and succeed early on. Yes, Baker was good last year, but that is an exception. Remember, that was a record that he set. Even good quarterbacks like Manning and Brees have struggled as rookies there. They got offensive line issues there for the Cards, a great but aging Fitzgerald. Now, he could surprise some people because he is athletic, his ability to run, so he could end up being a plug-and-play at the end of the year, very much like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson were last year. But remember, even though they had some plug-and-play value, they were hot and cold, and they brought a lot of risk. And so stay away from rookie quarterbacks. We just always advise that. Every once in a while, one will kind of beat that trend, but generally speaking, there's a learning curve there.
27, we have Nick Foles. He is joining a Jacksonville Jaguars offense, which I believe fully last year was the worst offense in the NFL, has some of the worst players, almost no receiving weapons. I hear every year about the 5 different potential guys they have and sleepers, how those guys are sleepers. It's not because any of them seemingly are great wide receivers, but because the number one spot in that offense is always up for grabs because there's so little talent. They don't have a star tight end. Their running situation is great. And they don't trust the offensive line. Even if he improves that offense, which Nick Foles will, he's not going to improve it enough to be any better than a quarterback 27, maybe a little bit higher than that.
I'm choking here.
All right.
Excuse me. Sorry about that. It's at the end of the video. It's been an hour and 6 minutes. So we have right now number 28, Joe Flacco of Denver. You got it back to 2014 to find fantasy relevance for Joe. With Freeman and Lindsey there, the teams are going to try to run the ball often. The weapons besides Sanders, yeah, they got some wide receivers, tight ends of upside, but they're not proven. He's more of a game manager than a trustworthy fantasy quarterback. Stay away from Joe Flacco.
29, we have Marcus Mariota. He's in a quarterback battle with Ryan Tannehill. If that doesn't tell you how desperate and how bad his fantasy play has been, you clearly shouldn't be playing fantasy. Neither of those guys have any very much value right now in an offense that is not very passer-friendly.
So number 30, we got Eli Manning. His last 8 games, he was solid last year, but he's no longer a quarterback that can be trusted in fantasy football. Question is, how long if they struggle before they turn to the future and look at Daniel Jones and give him an opportunity there? He's going to be looking over his shoulder all year, even though he says he's not. You know he's going to. Saquon Barkley, his emergence means that team's going to focus on running the ball. That offense is going to run through Barkley. They're not going to throw the ball as much. Also, they lost Odell Beckham in the offseason. That's a huge downgrade. Yes, Ingram is solid. Shepard is solid. Too many question marks there. He can't be trusted as a fantasy quarterback at this point.
At 31, we have Ryan Fitzpatrick, who just got sent over to the Miami Dolphins. This guy has been thrown around from team to team year after year. For starters, if that doesn't make you concerned about how good of a quarterback he is, then you should reevaluate how you're examining quarterbacks, because if he was a good quarterback, teams would want him and they would keep him for many years. But he just keeps getting thrown around. And this year he's been thrown around to what I fully believe to be this year the least talented offense out there. There's no guy in that offense except Kenyon Drake that I see having any potential. Honestly, that is one of the worst wide receiving cores and tight end situations out there. It scares me and makes me uncomfortable. Yeah, he had a big season last year playing for Tampa, but Tampa had so many weapons.
Number 32, Dwayne Haskins. Now, one, if he beats out Case Keenum, have to wait and see that. But let's say he does. Doesn't matter. You got Peterson there, guys. They're going to be a run-heavy offense. He's a rookie quarterback. The wide receivers are not good. He's got to prove to trust this guy. He's my number 32 guy there. Yes, he's athletic. Yes, he's got some potential, but I would not trust him in fantasy.
All right, guys, there it is. That is our top 32 fantasy quarterbacks that you need to be looking at and what you need to know about them. As always, we remind you to drop a comment down below with any questions, thoughts, opinions, or a pushback that you have, and make sure to subscribe, follow, like, do all of that so you are getting our updates, because we're going to be posting soon with tons of updates to our website and our premium stat package, or whatever we're going to call that, but it's going to offer some huge advantage to you guys. Very excited about that. We'll update you on that in the next video. You guys have a good day.
Thanks for joining us.